You know that person at work who always seems perfectly fine? Smiling through every meeting, never complaining, always saying everything is great? What if I told you that behind that mask, there might be a storm of emotions they're desperately trying to contain? Today, we're going deep into the psychology of emotional suppression, and what you're about to discover might completely change how you see the people around you, and maybe even yourself. Let me start with something that might hit close to home. Have you ever been in a situation where someone asked, "How are you?" and you automatically said, "I'm fine," even though you were falling apart inside? That's not just politeness, that's a learned survival mechanism, and it's far more complex and dangerous than most people realize. The human mind has an incredible ability to compartmentalize, to lock away feelings in mental boxes and throw away the key. But here's the thing that most people don't understand. Those boxes don't stay locked forever. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something crucial about human psychology. Our emotions aren't just abstract feelings floating around in our consciousness. They're biochemical reactions, electrical signals, hormonal cascades that physically change our body. When you suppress an emotion, you're not making it disappear. You're redirecting it, forcing your body to absorb what your mind refuses to process. And your body keeps the score. Let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening inside the mind of someone who chronically hides their true feelings. Imagine your brain as a pressure cooker. Every unexpressed emotion, every swallowed tear, every forced smile adds pressure. The mind develops what psychologists call emotional suppression strategies, which are essentially complex coping mechanisms designed to keep the lid on that pressure cooker. But these strategies come at a cost that most people never see until it's too late. The first thing you need to understand is that people who hide their feelings aren't weak. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It takes an enormous amount of mental energy to maintain an emotional facade. Think about it. Every single day, they're running two parallel programs in their mind: the authentic emotional experience and the manufactured external presentation. It's like being an actor who never leaves the stage, never breaks character, even when they're alone in their dressing room. Now here's where it gets really interesting from a psychological standpoint. The human brain has this fascinating structure called the prefrontal cortex, which is essentially your brain's executive control center. When someone is actively suppressing their emotions, their prefrontal cortex goes into overdrive, constantly monitoring and regulating their emotional expression. Studies using fMRI brain scans have shown that emotional suppression actually increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, while simultaneously increasing physiological stress markers like elevated heart rate and blood pressure. Your brain is literally working against your body's natural responses. But why do people do this? Why would someone choose to carry this exhausting burden? The answer isn't simple, and it's rarely just one reason. Let's break down the psychological architecture that builds someone into an emotional suppressor, because understanding the why is crucial to understanding the what. First, there's childhood conditioning. Many people who hide their feelings learned early in life that expressing emotions was either punished, ignored, or used against them. Maybe they grew up in a household where showing vulnerability was seen as weakness. Maybe their caregivers were emotionally unavailable, so the child learned that expressing needs was pointless. Or perhaps they experienced trauma and discovered that shutting down emotionally was the only way to survive. These early experiences literally rewire the developing brain, creating neural pathways that default to suppression rather than expression. Then there's cultural conditioning. Different cultures have vastly different norms around emotional expression. In many cultures, especially for men, showing certain emotions like sadness or fear is heavily stigmatized. Women, on the other hand, are often penalized for expressing anger or ambition. These cultural scripts become internalized, and people learn to perform the emotional displays that are socially acceptable while hiding everything else. The mask becomes so familiar that sometimes they forget they're wearing it. There's also the protection mechanism. Some people hide their feelings because they've been hurt before when they were vulnerable. Maybe they opened up to someone who betrayed that trust, used their vulnerabilities as weapons, or simply didn't care. After enough of these experiences, the mind makes a calculation. The risk of being vulnerable outweighs the potential benefit of genuine connection. So they build walls, not to keep people out entirely, but to control exactly what people can see. But here's something most people miss. There's a difference between someone who occasionally suppresses emotions in appropriate contexts and someone who has made emotional suppression their default mode of existence. The latter group is who we're really talking about today. These are people who have essentially lost touch with their own authentic emotional experience. They've become so skilled at suppression that they sometimes can't even identify what they're actually feeling anymore. Psychologists call this alexithymia, which literally means no words for emotions. It's a condition where people have difficulty identifying and describing their own emotional states. And while not everyone who suppresses emotions develops full alexithymia, chronic suppression can definitely push people in that direction. Imagine living in a state where you know something feels off, something feels wrong, but you can't quite identify what you're feeling or why. It's like emotional blindness. Now let's talk about what this looks like from the outside, because chances are you know someone like this. You might even be someone like this. People who hide their true feelings often display certain behavioral patterns that, once you know what to look for, become almost impossible to miss. They're often the helpers, the fixers, the ones who are always there for everyone else but never seem to need anything themselves. They deflect conversations away from their own problems with practiced ease, often using humor or by redirecting focus to the other person. They're masters of the shallow connection, able to be friendly and warm without ever letting anyone truly close. They maintain relationships at a carefully controlled distance, close enough to not seem isolated, but far enough to protect their inner world. You'll notice they rarely show strong emotions. Their effect, as psychologists call it, tends to be remarkably stable. They don't get too excited, too angry, too sad. Everything is moderated, controlled, measured, and when life throws them curveballs that would devastate most people, they seem almost unnaturally composed. People often mistake this for strength or resilience, not realizing that what they're witnessing is dissociation, a psychological disconnection from one's own emotional experience. Here's something crucial that most people don't realize. Emotional suppression requires constant vigilance. The person suppressing their feelings is always monitoring themselves, always checking to make sure the mask is in place, always ready to course correct if a genuine emotion threatens to leak through. This creates what psychologists call chronic cognitive load, where a significant portion of their mental resources are constantly devoted to emotional regulation rather than being available for other cognitive tasks. This is why people who chronically suppress emotions often report feeling mentally exhausted, even when they haven't done anything particularly demanding. It's also why they might struggle with memory, concentration, and decision-making. Their brain is running too many programs simultaneously, and something has to give. But let's dig deeper into what's actually happening neurologically, because this is where it gets truly fascinating. When you experience an emotion, it starts in the limbic system, particularly in structures like the amygdala. This emotional response is automatic and incredibly fast. Then, if you're suppressing that emotion, your prefrontal cortex has to step in and essentially override that limbic response. But here's the problem. The limbic system is older, more primitive, and in many ways more powerful than the prefrontal cortex. Think of it like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can do it, but it requires constant effort, and the moment you let up, that ball is shooting back to the surface. Suppressed emotions work the same way. They don't go away. They're constantly pushing to be acknowledged, constantly requiring energy to keep submerged. And the longer you suppress them, the more forcefully they push back. This is why people who suppress emotions often experience what seems like random emotional outbursts over seemingly trivial things. They're not actually overreacting to that small inconvenience. They're finally releasing the accumulated pressure of hundreds of suppressed emotional experiences. The broken coffee mug isn't the problem. It's the final straw that breaks through the dam they've been maintaining for months or years. Now let's talk about the physical toll, because this isn't just a mental health issue, it's a whole body phenomenon. When you suppress emotions, your body still generates all the physiological responses associated with those emotions. Your heart rate increases, stress hormones like cortisol flood your system, your blood pressure rises, your muscles tense. But instead of expressing the emotion and allowing your body to return to baseline, You're holding all of that physiological arousal inside. Over time, this chronic physiological stress contributes to a host of physical health problems. Research has consistently linked emotional suppression to increased risk of cardiovascular disease, weakened immune function, chronic pain conditions, and even cancer. Your body is not designed to constantly be in a state of suppressed stress. It wears down your systems like running an engine at high RPMs without ever giving it a break. There's also emerging research on how emotional suppression affects the gut microbiome, sleep quality, and inflammatory responses. The mind-body connection isn't some mystical concept, it's hard biology. Your emotional state directly influences your physical health through measurable, observable pathways. When you chronically suppress emotions, you're essentially choosing a slower form of self-destruction, one that's invisible until the damage becomes undeniable. But here's what really keeps me up at night when I think about this topic: the social cost. Humans are social creatures. We're evolutionarily wired for connection, for genuine emotional exchange. When someone is constantly hiding their true feelings, they're fundamentally blocking the possibility of authentic connection. They might have many relationships, but none of them can be truly deep or satisfying because they're always holding back their authentic self. This creates a tragic paradox. People often suppress their emotions because they fear rejection or abandonment. But by suppressing their emotions, they guarantee that no one can truly know them or connect with them. They protect themselves from potential rejection by making genuine acceptance impossible. It's like wearing armor so heavy that no one can hurt you, but it's also so heavy that no one can hug you either. And here's the thing that makes this even more complex. People who suppress their emotions often attract relationships with other people who do the same thing. It becomes this dance of two people, both hiding, both pretending, both desperately lonely, but unable to bridge the gap, because neither one is willing to be vulnerable first. They might spend decades together without ever truly knowing each other. Now I want to address something important because I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be wondering if emotional suppression is always bad. Is there ever a time when it's appropriate or even necessary to hide your true feelings? And the answer is yes, but with a crucial distinction. There's a difference between emotional regulation and emotional suppression. Emotional regulation is the ability to modulate your emotional expression in contextually appropriate ways. It's choosing not to scream at your boss, even though you're furious, with the plan to process that anger in a healthy way later. It's maintaining composure during a crisis so you can handle the situation effectively while acknowledging internally what you're feeling. Emotional suppression, on the other hand, is attempting to eliminate the emotion itself, to pretend it doesn't exist, to disconnect from your authentic emotional experience. It's not, I'm angry, but I'm choosing not to express it right now. It's, I'm not angry, I'm fine. Everything is fine. See the difference? The former is a healthy skill, the latter is a destructive pattern, and the people we're talking about today have crossed the line from regulation to suppression. They've moved from strategic emotional management to chronic emotional avoidance. So what happens to these people long-term? What's the ultimate trajectory of someone who spends their life hiding their true feelings? Unfortunately, the research paints a pretty grim picture. Without intervention, chronic emotional suppression typically leads to one of several outcomes. Some people experience what's called emotional numbing, where they gradually lose the ability to feel positive emotions as strongly as they once did. Life becomes grey, muted, empty. They're not exactly depressed in the clinical sense, but they're not really living either. They're just existing, going through the motions, feeling like they're watching life happen rather than participating in it. Others eventually hit a breaking point. Years of suppressed emotions suddenly come crashing through all at once, often triggered by a major life stressor like a death, divorce, or job loss. This can manifest as a severe depressive episode, an anxiety disorder, or sometimes even a complete identity crisis, where they suddenly realize they don't know who they are underneath all the masks they've been wearing. Some develop what psychologists call somatic symptom disorders, where their suppressed emotions manifest as physical symptoms. Chronic pain, digestive issues, mysterious illnesses that doctors can't quite diagnose. Their body is speaking the emotions their mind refuses to acknowledge. And then there are those who simply continue the pattern until they die, never having truly lived, never having been truly known, carrying their authentic self to the grave like a secret that was too dangerous to share. It's a quiet tragedy, one that plays out in countless lives, invisible to the outside world. But here's the thing, and this is crucial, it doesn't have to end this way. The human mind has a remarkable capacity for change, for healing, for learning new patterns. Neuroplasticity means that even deeply ingrained emotional patterns can be rewired with consistent effort and often professional support. The first step is always awareness. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. For someone who has spent years or decades suppressing their emotions, simply becoming aware of the pattern is revolutionary. It's like suddenly seeing a door that was there all along, but that they'd trained themselves not to notice. Then comes the hard work of learning to identify and tolerate emotions. For many people who suppress their feelings, emotions feel overwhelming, dangerous, unbearable. They've convinced themselves that if they really let themselves feel what they're feeling, they'll be destroyed by it. Part of healing is discovering that emotions, while sometimes intense and uncomfortable, are not actually dangerous. You can feel sadness without being destroyed by it. You can feel anger without losing control. You can feel fear without being paralyzed by it. This often requires professional help, particularly from therapists trained in approaches like emotion-focused therapy, somatic experiencing, or dialectical behavior therapy. These approaches specifically target the relationship someone has with their emotions, teaching them to observe, accept, and process feelings rather than suppress them. There's also the social component of healing, learning to be vulnerable with safe people, to practice expressing emotions in low-stakes situations, to gradually expand the circle of people who get to see your authentic self. This is terrifying for someone who has built their identity around emotional control, but it's also where the real healing happens. Connection is the antidote to the isolation that emotional suppression creates. Now, I want to talk directly to two groups of people who might be watching this. First, if you recognize yourself in this description, if you're realizing that you might be someone who chronically hides their true feelings, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You developed this pattern for a reason, probably to protect yourself in an environment where emotional expression felt unsafe. It made sense at the time. It might have even saved you. But the question you need to ask yourself now is this pattern still serving you? Or is it now causing more harm than good? Are you protecting yourself, or are you imprisoning yourself? And most importantly, are you willing to consider that there might be another way to live? The second group I want to address is those of you who have someone in your life who fits this description. Maybe it's your partner, your parent, your friend. You can sense that there's something beneath the surface that they're not sharing, some pain they're carrying alone. You want to help, but you don't know how. Here's what you need to understand. You cannot force someone to open up before they're ready. Pushing too hard often makes people retreat further behind their walls. What you can do is create safety. Be consistently trustworthy. Don't punish vulnerability when it does appear. Don't use people's emotions against them. Show through your actions, not just your words, that it's safe to be real with you. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is gently name what you see. Not in an accusatory way, but from a place of care. Something like, I notice you always say you're fine, but I wonder if that's really true. I want you to know that if you're not fine, that's okay too. I'm here if you ever want to talk about what's really going on. You might be surprised how powerful it can be for someone to have their hidden struggle acknowledged. To have someone say, I see you, even the parts you're trying to hide. It doesn't fix everything, but it can plant a seed that maybe, just maybe, they don't have to carry everything alone. Let me leave you with this final thought. We live in a culture that often celebrates emotional stoicism, that admires people who can remain calm and composed no matter what. We praise people for being strong, for not letting things get to them, for always having it together. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if real strength isn't in suppressing emotions, but in having the courage to feel them fully and express them authentically? The people who hide their true feelings aren't the strong ones, they're the scared ones. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a recognition of the fear that drives this pattern. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being too much or not enough, fear of being hurt or abandoned. These are deeply human fears, and they deserve compassion, not admiration. True strength looks like vulnerability. It looks like saying, "I'm struggling" when you're struggling. It looks like crying when you're sad, expressing anger when you're angry, asking for help when you need it. It looks like being fully human, messy and imperfect and real. So whether you're someone who hides their feelings or someone who knows someone who does, I hope this video has given you a deeper understanding of what's really happening beneath the surface. The mind of someone who suppresses their emotions is a complex, exhausting, and ultimately tragic place to live. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Change is possible. Healing is possible. Authentic connection is possible. It just requires the courage to take off the mask and show the world who you really are.